I remember the weight of the chisel. It was long ago, so long that I do not count the days anymore. Back then, I was just a piece of limestone, hidden deep in the quarry, encased in silence. Then came the day I felt the first strike of iron, a purposeful intrusion that sang of intention. I remember the roughness of the worker's hand, the sweat that trickled down his wrist as he shaped Minot as a warrior would shape a weapon, but as a father molds a cradle. I was not being destroyed. I was being called. They said I would be part of something holy. There was a reverence in the way they carried me, as if even before I had taken my place in the temple wall, I already bore a purpose. The men who placed me in the foundation whispered prayers under their breath, and their fingertips lingered a moment longer on my surface. I remember the smell of cedar from Lebanon, the sound of bronze instruments being tuned, the long shadows cast by the rising sun over Mount Moriah. I was not the highest stone. I was not adorned. I was not seen, but I was chosen. And in the silence that followed my setting, I heard something for the very first time, the echo of a voice, not from man, but from within, a stillness that pulsed. The earth beneath me hummed with something ancient, as if creation itself exhaled in contentment. They came in waves after that. Pilgrims, prophets, priests, widows, children. Their feet passed over me. Their voices filled the courts. I listened. I bore their weight. I held their sorrow. There was a rhythm to their prayers, a rising and falling like tides against the shore. Some wept, some sang, some merely stood in silence, letting their longing seep into the cracks. I absorbed it all. There was one old man, I never knew his name, who knelt in the same spot every week, always at dawn. His back was bent like the branch of an olive tree in winter. He never spoke aloud, but I heard him. Deep within, beneath the murmurs and movement, I felt the pulse of his plea. When, Lord? When will you come? The prophets came too. Isaiah once stood not far from me. I remember his voice, low and steady, like wind moving through dry grass. He did not shout. He didn't need to. His words carried weight. A shoot shall come up from the stump of Jesse, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. The people fell silent. Even the birds above paused in their flight. And I, a simple stone, felt something stir within my core. Could it be? Would he come here, to this place, to these walls, to these waiting hearts? I did not know then that I would wait for centuries. But in those early days, I did not mind the waiting. The temple was alive. The light fell through its arches in long golden beams. The incense curled into the air like a song without words. There was beauty, order, and expectation. And though I was silent, I was never alone. Then came the years of change, but that is another story. For now, I remember the hands that built me, their care, their reverence, their hidden hope. I was not just a stone. I was part of a promise. And even now, with a crack running across my side, I still remember the beginning. I still remember the hands. There was a day when the temple breathed as if it were alive, when the courts were filled not just with people, but with prophecy. I remember the way their voices carried not in volume, but in weight. The prophets did not need to raise their tones to command silence. The silence came on its own, like nightfall in the desert, sudden and sacred. I could feel the words before I could hear them. Isaiah, he stood on the outer steps, not near the sanctuary, but not far either. His eyes were weathered, his tunic rough, but his presence carried the tension of thunder before a storm. He spoke of the one who was to come not in fury but in fidelity, not in splendor but in suffering. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. The words fell onto me like water on dry stone. I had never heard anything like it. In a place built to celebrate majesty, he spoke of meekness. In walls clothed in gold and linen, he spoke of torn garments and blood. I did not understand it, not fully, but I remembered. Every syllable carved a groove into my memory deeper than the chisels that shaped my form. He was not the only one. Others came, each with different tones, different griefs, different hopes. Jeremiah wept. He stood with shoulders hunched, hands trembling, and his voice broke when he cried out that the temple itself would fall. Do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. His voice echoed 3 times. I remember, because on the third, a wind swept through the courtyard, sudden and cold, and even the flame in the bronze lamp flickered. I was afraid, though I had no breath to show it. Could we fall? Could this sacred place crumble? He was taken away, that man. Not many listened. Not then. But I remembered, and I began to listen not just to the words spoken aloud, but to those buried beneath silence, the quiet resistance in a widow's kneel, the doubt in a priest's sigh, the weary hope of a child tugging his father's hand toward the altar. It was not always the prophets who spoke loudest. Sometimes it was the voiceless who whispered the clearest longing. The longing was everywhere. I heard it most when people thought no one was listening. A young girl once leaned against my side and wept, not with drama but with the soft rhythm of someone who had no more tears left. Her fingers traced the cracks in my surface. "Do you see me?" she asked. No one replied, but I felt the question vibrate through me, and I knew that someday, someone would answer her. In time, even I began to ache for the one they spoke of. The anointed, the servant, the root of Jesse. I could not move. I could not speak, but something in me, perhaps the part that remembered the first hands that set me, here began to yearn. It is a strange thing for a stone to hope, yet I did. I hoped he would come, that he would not pass me by, that his footsteps might fall upon my back, even just once. I wanted to feel the weight of the promise fulfilled, and so I listened to the prophets, not just with the cracks in my surface, but with the wound forming deep within me, the invisible fracture that no one else could see, the one that had nothing to do with age or weather or war, but everything to do with waiting. I do not know exactly when the first crack appeared. It was not sudden, like a sword's blow, or the violent shaking of the earth. It was slower, quieter, like the splitting of wood under pressure, like the silent drift of a mountain before it crumbles. But I felt it. I remember the moment, not for its violence, but for its grief. There had been a change. The footsteps that once echoed with purpose across the temple courts had grown hurried, distracted. The prayers that once lingered with reverence now passed like smoke in a storm. I, who had borne the weight of generations, began to feel abandoned, not by people they still came, but by something deeper, something holy. The presence that once hummed beneath me like a river under stone grew faint, and one morning, as the sun stretched over the eastern wall, I felt a fine, thin line, no wider than a strand of hair, tracing itself across my surface. I would not have noticed had it not pulsed. A quiet shiver moved through my being, not from wind or tremor, but from within. The fracture was not of structure, it was of soul, and though I had no voice, I wanted to cry out. The priests did not notice. Their rituals continued: clean hands, practiced chants, perfect robes, but their eyes, they no longer searched the heavens. They watched each other, some with pride, others with suspicion. A man once dropped a coin near me, meant for the offering box. He hesitated before picking it up. I remember his expression, not reverence, not guilt, only calculation. And in that moment, I knew the crack had widened. It was not all at once. Days passed, then years, then decades. The temple was rebuilt, expanded, polished. They adorned me with gold and called it glory, but no gold could mend what had already broken. The first crack was not just in me, it was in them, in the people, in the covenant. I heard it in their voices, more debate than devotion, more noise than yearning. They quoted the prophets now, but with teeth, not to hope, but to win arguments. And all the while, I listened, I remembered, I mourned. One day, I heard children playing in the outer court, their laughter rising above the chants of the Levites. It was a rare sound, pure and bright, but a guard silenced them quickly. "This is the house of the Lord," he barked, as if joy had no place here, as if laughter were a threat. I felt ashamed, not of them, but of Yusuf, what we had become. The crack deepened, then came the blood. There were uprisings, protests, soldiers marching with iron in their fists. I do not remember the names of the kings or the dates of their decrees, but I remember the blood. It soaked into the stones, into me. It was warm at first, then sticky, then dry. And with it came a silence so heavy, it pressed into my fissures like ash. People still came to the temple, but fewer. The songs were softer, the eyes more guarded. I missed the old man who used to kneel at dawn. He stopped coming. I do not know if he died or simply stopped hoping. Either way, the space he once filled remained empty, like a hole in the sky that no light could reach. One night, I felt rain. It fell soft and slow, but not from clouds. It was the tears of a young man pressed against my side, hidden behind the pillars. He was shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of everything he carried. "Have you left us?" he whispered. "Are you still here?" His voice cracked more deeply than I ever could, and for the first time in many years, I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him that I too was waiting, that I too had felt the absence, that I too longed for the return of the fire. But I could not speak, so I held him, as best a stone can hold, firm beneath his trembling body, letting his tears mix with the dust in my cracks. That night, I remembered Isaiah again. He was pierced for our transgressions. By his wounds we are healed. I did not yet understand how wounds could heal. I only knew that I was wounded, not destroyed, not discarded, but opened. And perhaps, in time, something might grow from the opening, a shoot from the stump, a light from the fracture, a voice from the silence. Until then, I remained, I waited, I cracked. The scent of incense used to move like breath through the temple, curling in the air above our heads, slipping between columns and across the faces of the faithful. It carried something invisible, something more than perfume or remembrance, offering, reverence. In those days, the smoke lingered, as if even heaven paused to receive it. But time has a way of thinning things, and eventually, even the incense began to fade. Not in amount they burned more than ever, but in weight. It no longer felt alive. It no longer carried longing. It just drifted. I, a stone pressed into the floor near the inner court, was close enough to feel it as it passed, and I could tell the difference. The smoke now moved like habit, not hope. The priests came and went with precision. Their garments flowed, their voices rose in perfect cadence, but they moved like men who had forgotten their reasons. I watched them perform each gesture as though rehearsed 1,000 times, not out of reverence, but routine. One would lift the offering, eyes forward, lips moving. Another would light the coals, hands steady, face blank. They rarely looked up, rarely paused, rarely trembled. The old days were gone, when their footsteps whispered through the halls like pilgrims treading sacred ground. Now their sandals slapped the stone. I had become background. One morning, a young priest dropped his incense dish. It clattered against the floor and rolled toward me, spilling fragrant dust across my side. He froze. I could see it in his eyes, a flicker of something unguarded. Fear, shame, humility. He knelt to gather the granules, and for a moment, he did not move. His head bowed low, as though he remembered where he was, as though he had entered, briefly, into awe. But then the elder priest called his name, and the spell broke. He rose quickly, brushing the dust from his hands, and the silence closed in again. Silence. It was everywhere now. Not the sacred kind, not the stillness that settles like a hush before revelation. No, this was the silence of absence. A hollow echo where presence used to dwell. Even the pilgrims felt it. They came in fewer numbers, and when they did, their prayers were shorter, more guarded. They glanced over their shoulders as they knelt, unsure if anyone above or below was listening. I bore their knees. I carried their weight. But what I missed most was their hope. Hope had grown scarce. Once, there was an old woman who came at twilight. She was small, her back bent like the arc of the new moon. Every evening she shuffled into the court, placed her hands upon the same patch of stone upon me and whispered the same words. "You are still holy." That was all. She said nothing more. No requests, no explanations. Just that, a quiet defiance against the emptiness. I do not know who she was, nor how long she had been coming, but each night, as the sun dipped and the shadows lengthened, her voice struck deeper than any song. But she too stopped coming, and I feared she had died. The silence was complete. I began to wonder if the Lord still dwelled here. Why did he remain hidden? If this was his house, why did his presence no longer press against the air? I had heard story ancient ones of the glory cloud, the Shekinah, that once filled the Holy of Holies, so dense no priest could stand. But now, nothing. Only ritual, only rhythm, only stone and smoke and silence. Had we pushed him away, or had we simply forgotten how to listen? And yet, not all was lost. In the silence, something else began to stir, not loud, not sudden, but slow, like dawn behind a distant hill. I started to feel it in the footsteps of strangers. They came from far-off places, not with gold or sacrifice, but with questions. Their accents were different, their robes plain, their eyes searching. Some looked at the temple with awe, others with confusion. But a few looked with hunger, as if they were looking for something buried beneath the gold, behind the veil, beneath the cracks. One such man knelt beside me. He said nothing. He just sat, hands clasped, eyes closed. Minutes passed, maybe more. Then he opened his eyes and whispered, not to me, not to anyone nearby, but to the silence itself. If you are real, I am ready. And in that moment, something in me deep and forgotten trembled. Not a crack, not a shiver, something gentler, a stirring, as if his words had stirred the ash and found a buried ember. Perhaps silence is not absence. Perhaps it is waiting. Perhaps incense still matters, even when it fades quickly. Perhaps it is not the scent that pleases heaven, but the heart that offers it. I do not know. I am only a stone, but I remember what it was like when prayers hung heavy and hope was thick in the air. And I know this: the day he comes, if he ever does it, will not be into thunder or triumph. It will be into silence, into stillness, into longing, like incense that refuses to die. They were never the loudest. They did not wear robes or rings. They did not approach with ceremony or confidence, but they came, always they came. The poor, the forgotten, the bruised and bent and burdened. I remember them not by their names, but by their hands, the way they trembled, the way they cupped air as if it could hold their prayer. They did not speak long prayers. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. But I heard them. I heard them not with ears, for I have none, but with the stillness in my form. And their cries went deeper into me than any chisel. They knelt in corners, out of sight. They came at dusk or at dawn, when the temple was quieter, when the eyes of the proud had turned elsewhere. I felt their knees press into me, thin and trembling. I felt their backs heave with sobs too old to name. They touched me not with power but with desperation. And in their touch, I learned something the golden pillars never taught me. I learned what it meant to ache for mercy. One girl, I think she was no more than 12, knelt once near the edge of the court. Her dress was torn, her feet bare, and her arms wrapped tightly around her own waist, as if to keep herself from falling apart. She said only one thing, again and again, each time quieter than before. Please. That was all. Please. I do not know what she was asking, but I know the silence around her shimmered like heat over stone. I felt her pain vibrate through me like thunder without sound, and I remember wishing not for the first time that I could become something more than a stone, that I could lift her, answer her, change something, but I could not. I could only hold her weight and remember. They say the temple was made for worship, for sacrifice, for laws and rituals. But I believe it was also made for them, for the broken, the bowed, the voiceless, for those who had nothing to offer but themselves. And though many looked past them, I never could. I bore their weariness. I cradled their grief. Their presence pressed into me more deeply than the sandals of king. I remember a widow old, skin like parchment, eyes like glass. She brought 2 small coins and dropped them into the offering box near me. The sound was barely audible, but to me it was like the strike of a bell, not for the coins, but for her heart. I had felt many gifts given, some large, some loud, most heavy with pride. But hers was different. Her offering was almost nothing, yet it echoed. I held that echo in me for days, and I wondered, if heaven had ears, did it hear what I had heard? Sometimes the poor did not speak at all. They simply sat, as if hoping the sacred might leak from the stone into their skin. And sometimes, I believe, it did. Not in ways that could be seen, not in miracles or visions, but in a quiet filling, a warmth where there had been only cold. I felt it pass from me into them, and I held no regret in the giving. But not all who saw them understood. Some turned their heads, others mocked. I heard a Pharisee once sneer at a beggar, calling him cursed for his poverty. "He is unclean," the man said. "Let him stay at the edge." And though the beggar said nothing, I felt his shame like acid on my surface. That night, I wished I could crack wide open and swallow that cruelty whole. But I could not. I could only remember. I could only wait. The poor taught me something that the wealthy never could, that faith is not polished or pure. It is not measured in coins or verses. It is often raw, trembling, wordless. It is found in hunger that will not be silenced, in hands that keep reaching even when nothing comes. They taught me that the greatest prayers are not always spoken aloud. Some are cried into the earth, some are pressed into stone, and I have held them all. So, when they say the temple was for the righteous, I want to shout, if only I could, that it was also for the weeping, that we, the stones, remember not the names of priests but the sighs of the broken. That holiness is not always found in incense or offering, but in the tears that fall unnoticed beside the altar. That the true sacrifice is often not in the hands of the priest, but in the silent surrender of the poor. And I wonder, when he comes, if he comes, will he come through the gate of triumph? Or will he enter quietly, through the side, and kneel beside the ones who were never seen? I do not know, but I believe this. When he comes, he will not pass by the poor. He will stop. He will touch their faces. And maybe then, finally, the cry I have heard for centuries will be answered. Not with thunder, not with gold, but with arms that embrace. They came in shadows, not in processions. They entered through side gates, not the grand stairs where the dignitaries walk. Their robes were worn, their hands calloused, their eyes heavy from more than lack of sleep. I knew them by their silence first, how they lingered, not from ritual, but from need. Not because they were told to come, but because they had nowhere else to go. The poor did not disturb the temple's order. They did not upset its gold or challenge its authority, but they unsettled its comfort. And I, a stone pressed into the outer court, received them without judgment. I heard them when others did not. There was a mother once, barely more than a girl, cradling a child with ribs like lattice beneath its skin. She laid a cloth on the ground and sat beside me, rocking her baby with a rhythm older than speech. Her lips moved, not loud, not dramatic, just a breath. Do not let him die. She did not ask for riches. She did not ask for revenge. Only that. Only life. Her prayer sank into the dust like water, and I held it. I still hold it. And there was the old man who came each Sabbath with empty hands. He stood far from the altar, never daring to approach the offerings. But he whispered psalms to himself, the old ones. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. I do not know who taught him those words, or whether he believed them anymore, but he said them as if they were the only rope keeping him from slipping into despair. And somehow, though I could not lift him, I became his foundation. He stood on me, and I bore his sorrow without breaking. The priest barely noticed them. Their eyes were trained on protocol, not people. The poor were not threats, not clients, not concern. They were part of the landscape like dust, like birds, like me. But I knew better. Their cries were the only ones that reached the hidden places, the cracks that no incense could fill, because they cried not just with words, but with everything they were. They did not perform. They pleaded. Once, a boy slipped in unnoticed. He was too young to be alone, but there he was, barefoot and thin, with eyes that had seen too much. He did not approach the altar. He found a corner near the wall near me and sat. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, he said, "I am not afraid to die, but I don't want to be alone. I have never forgotten that, not because it was tragic, but because it was true." In that boy's voice, I heard the cry of Israel, the longing not for power or comfort, but for presence. That is what they wanted, the poor. Not pity, not provision, presence. Someone to sit beside them, someone to know they were there, someone to say, "I see you. I saw them, I heard them." And I began to wonder if perhaps the Lord heard them too, not from the high places of the temple, but from the low stones like me, from the dust, from the broken, from the places where pain was not polished or censored, but simply allowed to be. I began to imagine something impossible, What if he came not for the priests, but for the poor? What if he walked these courts not in robes of splendor, but with sand on his feet? What if the cracked stones like me were the ones he stepped on most gently? I had no proof, only the whisper of longing. But it clung to me like morning mist. One evening, as the sun bled red across the rooftops, a woman poured oil on the floor near the altar. It was all she had: no lamb, no dove, just oil. Some laughed, others scolded, but I felt it soak into my surface, warm and fragrant. And I knew this was worship, not because it was perfect, but because it was everything she had. The poor did not offer out of abundance. They offered out of desperation. And desperation, when turned heavenward, is something holy. The temple grew louder in those years. More trade, more rules, more boundaries. But beneath the noise, I kept hearing them. The ones who knelt in silence, the ones who whispered at dusk, the ones who wept with no one to wipe their tears. They were not loud. They did not shake walls or draw crowds, but they moved me, and I am stone. I do not know theology. I do not understand sacrifice, but I believe the Lord who once thundered from Sinai can also speak in sob. I believe the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob does not only dwell in fire, but in famine, not just in victory, but in vulnerability. And if he is coming as the prophets say, then he will come first to those who have nothing, to the ones who have cried longest, to the ones who no longer expect to be answered. When he comes, may his feet tread here. May he stand upon me, not the polished stairs. May he hear what I have heard, see what I have seen. May he walk among the poor, and may he kneel, because they were the ones who never stopped praying, even when the heavens went silent. Hope does not arrive with trumpets. It does not announce itself with banners or parades. It slips in, quiet and unnoticed, like morning light between the cracks of a ruined roof. That is how it came to Miss Subtle, small, and almost missed. But once it came, I could not forget it. I remember the evening clearly. The temple was quiet, more from exhaustion than reverence. The sun had just dropped below the horizon, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and burnt offerings. I lay in my usual silence, pressed into the floor of the court, worn smooth from centuries of sandals. And then, a sound of footstep, softer than most, and a voice, not raised but resolute. A girl. A child, really. No older than 12, her frame slight beneath a coarse cloak. She did not come with others. She came alone, and unlike the priests or merchants or pilgrims, she did not look upward. She looked around, at the stones, at the walls, at the sky turning indigo. Then she knelt. No fanfare, no formula, just a single motion of surrender. She placed something small on the floor beside Mia, scrap of parchment, folded carefully. Her hands trembled as she set it down. Then she whispered, "If you are coming, I will wait." That was all, no further plea, no explanation. She stood and left, her steps as soft as her arrival. I wanted to hold on to that voice. I wanted to keep her words wrapped in my cracks, like a secret ember in a field of ash. Because that was the first time in decades that someone had not just mourned or begged, but waited. The parchment stayed there through the night. No one noticed it. In the morning, a breeze lifted it and carried it away. But I remembered. The words had already taken root. I did not know it yet, but something had shifted. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt expectant, as if the stones themselves had begun to lean forward. After that night, more kamino many, but enough to notice. A shepherd from the hills, his clothes ragged, his eyes strangely bright. A widow with hands like bark, who hummed a lullaby though no child clung to her anymore. A foreigner with skin like bronze, who stood for hours and said nothing, yet radiated a kind of ache I had learned to recognize. They were not the powerful, not the religious elite, but they carried something the temple had forgotten: yearning. It was not loud, it was not constant, but it was enough, a flicker, a pulse. I began to feel warmth again, not from the sun, but from within, as if the ancient fire that once filled the Holy of Holies had not died, but hidden, buried beneath layers of form and fear, waiting for breath, waiting for welcome. And I, a broken stone, longed to welcome it. Then one morning, long before the crowds arrived, a young man entered the court. I remember the way he walked, not hurried, not timid, but with the calm of someone who carried no burden heavier than purpose. He looked ordinary. No fine robe, no attendants, no signs of stature. But when his foot touched my surface, something inside me stirred. Not a crack, not a tremor, a warmth, as if recognition passed between us, not from memory, but from essence. He stood near the gate for a long time, watching the sun rise over the eastern wall. He said nothing, but his silence was not empty. It was full of presence, full of power withheld, full of promise. I did not know who he was, not then, but every stone around me seemed to lean toward him. Even the birds quieted their songs. He reached down and touched the ground, just a brief graze of fingers across dust, and then he whispered something too soft for human ears, but I heard it. Soon, that was all. And then he left. The temple returned to its usual rhythm. The noise returned, the trade resumed, but I was not the same. I had felt something alive, something near, and though the silence returned, it no longer weighed the same. It shimmered now, like air before a storm. Hope, I learned, does not always come in fullness. Sometimes it comes in fragments, in a whisper, in a glance, in the breath between words. But when it comes, it changes everything, even if the world doesn't notice. That night, as the stars scattered above Jerusalem and the lamps flickered against the stone, I kept remembering that word. Soon. It was not a promise made to kings or priests or scribes. It was spoken into the cracks, into the waiting, into me. And for the first time in a long time, I did not mourn the silence. I cherished it, because silence can be the womb of revelation, and hope, even flickering, is fire enough for stones to dream again. I have known many footsteps. I have felt sandals worn thin by pilgrimage, boots heavy with authority, bare feet trembling with reverence. But the ones that came that day were different. They did not tread, they stormed. Not like a wind from heaven, but like a force from below. It was a day of noise, of clash, of cries layered upon cries. The temple was never meant for war. It was meant for worship. But that morning, something shifted. The ground beneath me, ancient and steady, began to tremble, and Istone, though I am felt fear, it began with shouts. Not the kind of shouting that comes from joy or song, but from panic. A crowd gathered near the outer courts, not in prayer but in confrontation. I could not see, but I could hear a mixture of accusation, defense, and command. Then the sound of something breaking, a table perhaps, a bench, the kind used by money changers. Coins scattered and rang against the stone like hard rain, rolling into cracks, falling through grates. I felt a rush of movement, bodies pushing, robes tearing, and then came the voice. It was not the first time I had heard him. I remembered the quiet word he had whispered days before. Soon, but now his voice was fire, not in volume, but in clarity. It cut through chaos like a blade through cloth. My Father's house is not a marketplace. Each word struck like a hammer, and though the crowd resisted, the air itself recoiled. He overturned tables, not with rage, but with resolve. Animals bolted, merchants shouted. The smoke of burning offerings twisted with dust as the temple was thrown into confusion. And then the shaking began, not a great earthquake. No walls collapsed, but the ground trembled with something deeper than tectonic plates. This was no fault of the earth. It was the fault of hearts. I felt it inside me, not just beneath trembling of truth meeting corruption. The foundation itself crying out, not in destruction, but in warning, like a groan, like the first tear in a curtain. I thought of Isaiah again. The Lord enters his temple with justice and fury. I had never understood that verse, not until now, because this was not fury for its own sake. It was fury born of love, a love unwilling to let sacred things be desecrated. A love that did not sit idle while the poor were trampled and the holy bartered. And I, cracked and weary as I was, recognized it, not as threat, but as vindication. For years I had waited. I had listened to prayers that were never answered, absorbed tears that were never acknowledged. I had borne silence so thick it pressed like a tomb. And now someone had come who would not accept the silence, who would not let lies go unchallenged, who overturned tables, not out of disdain for the temple, but to restore it, to wake it, to cleanse it. The priests were furious. Their robes, once flowing symbols of authority, flared like cloaks of panic. They demanded to know who gave him such power. He did not answer the way they expected. He never did. He said something about destroying this temple and raising it in 3 days. They laughed, scornful, but I heard the double meaning. He was not speaking of stones like me. He was speaking of himself. And though I did not understand the fullness of it then, I felt its weight. That night, the temple was quieter than usual. The dust had not yet settled. The scent of overturned cages and spilled oil lingered. But there was something else, a clarity. Like after a storm, when the air is sharp and everything breathes easier. I lay still, but I pulsed with memory, not just of the shaking, but of the man who dared to shake us. For years we had clung to structure, to ceremony, to shadow, but he had brought something real, raw, clean. And in his anger, I had felt peace, not because it was comfortable, but because it was right. I do not know what others felt that day. Some feared him, some hated him, some whispered, for the first time, about a hope that could not be bought. But two remembered every step he took across my surface. I remembered the way he turned not to destroy, but to reclaim. I remembered the way my cracks hummed when he passed, as if even my brokenness bore witness to his purpose. The day it shook, I did not crumble, I held. Because what passed through us that day was not chaos, but cleansing. It was not ruin, it was restoration. And though the trembling ceased, its echo stayed in me, still stays. Because once a stone has known the weight of the true high priest, it cannot forget. After the shaking, silence did not return the same. It was no longer the hollow absence I had known for years. It was charged now like air before thunder, like the breath held between question and answer. The courts were swept, the tables replaced, the coins gathered, but the echo of overturned certainty lingered. The man who had come with fire in his voice and truth in his eyes had left no footprint that could be seen, but I, buried low in the temple floor, bore the imprint of his presence. The others moved on. The priests resumed their patterns, louder now, more careful, as if to assert control over what had slipped beyond their grasp. But I did not move. I could not. I lay in the dust, deeper than before. I had always been close to the ground, but now I felt beneath it, covered, forgotten, yet alert. Dust does not speak. It settles, it waits. It absorbs the tread of the hurried and the hesitant alike. And in that dust, I found myself listening more intently than ever before, listening for his return, for a whisper, for another word to shatter the stagnant air. But days passed, and he did not come. Still, I waited. And in my waiting, I remembered the ancient promises, the words spoken centuries before about a servant who would not shout, who would not break the bruised reed, who would bring justice not with weapons but with wounds. I remembered Isaiah again, not as poetry, but as prophecy. It was not that the temple had stopped being sacred. It was that it had forgotten why it was sacred. And now, perhaps, the remembering had begun. Pilgrims still came, some curious, some skeptical, some burdened by questions too heavy for language. One woman sat near me, clutching a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking. She did not enter the temple for sacrifice. She simply wept, not loud, not ashamed, just steady, like a stream that had been flowing underground and finally found release. I did not know her name. I did not need to. I felt her sorrow seep into me, and I held it. Not because I had answers, but because I had space. I had silence. I had been waiting long enough to make room for someone else's ache. That is what waiting does, I think. It carves out hollows, and into those hollows, others can come. I waited in the dust, not as a castaway, but as a keeper of space, a witness, a wound that did not seal. I had become a kind of altar myself, not the polished kind, dressed in linen and gold, but the kind made of dirt and memory, and perhaps, one day, of light. I began to notice things, small things. A boy giving his last coin not out of guilt but out of delight. A stranger helping a lame man to his feet with no expectation of reward. A merchant leaving his stall early to sit alone in the sun, his eyes lifted not to the sky, but to something deeper. These were not miracles, not yet, but they were cracks in the shell of indifference, glimmers. I remembered the flicker of hope. I recognized its rhythm. Sometimes, at night, I imagined him walking through the courts again, not overturning tables this time, but touching shoulders, lifting chins, speaking names. I did not know if such a day would come, but the imagining itself kept me warm. Stones are not known for hope, but I had been cracked open, and through the crack, something more than dust had entered. One evening, just before twilight, a young rabbi passed through. Not him, another, but his voice was gentle. He sat with his students on the steps above, reading aloud from the scroll. "The days are coming," declares the Lord, "when I will make a new covenant." His voice trembled as he read. Not from doubt, from awe. The others listened, fidgeting, murmuring, but he paused, letting the words settle. And then, almost to himself, he said, "I think it's near." No one replied. But I heard him, and the dust around me seemed to stir. The temple was still a place of structure, of hierarchy, of boundaries, but beneath it all, something was growing, quietly, like roots beneath stone, like breath in a grave. I could feel it, a movement not yet visible, but undeniable, not a revolution of force, a resurrection of faith. The man who had come before, he had not shouted, he had not demanded, but he had shaken everything. And I, who once thought my cracks were signs of decay, now wondered if they were openings. Openings for light, for life, for the Lord. So I waited, not idly, not despairing, but like a seed waits in darkness, like dust waits for rain, like a temple stone waits for the one who will not merely pass over it, but dwell within. He returned on a morning so ordinary that no one noticed. There was no trumpet, no sign in the sky, just the shuffle of feet, the murmur of merchants, the soft cooing of doves in their cages. And yet, the moment he stepped across the threshold, I knew. I, who had waited in dust and silence, cracked and lowly, felt his presence like fire through roots. He was not adorned. He wore no badge of rank, but every stone, every beam, every shadow leaned toward him. His steps were unhurried, but each one resonated like a heartbeat, steady and alive. People noticed him, but they did not know why. Some turned their heads without realizing. Others fell quiet mid-sentence. Children looked up. The priests frowned. But I remembered. I remembered the warmth of his voice when he whispered, "Soon." I remembered the trembling of truth in his fury. And now, I felt something new. A stillness so full it pressed against the air like the moment before a name is spoken. He walked past the outer court, not toward the altar, not toward the treasury, but toward the people. He stopped near a group of elders debating scripture. They were arguing over lineage, over law, over whether the Messiah would come from Bethlehem or Galilee. Their words were sharp, rehearsed, and tired. And then he spoke, not to argue, not to correct, just a few words, calm and clear. "You search the scriptures because you think in them you have life, but you refuse to come to me." The words landed like water on drought. No one answered. One man opened his mouth but closed it again. Another looked away. I felt the air shift, as if even heaven had paused to listen. It was not just what he said, it was how he said it. His voice held light, not brilliance or glare, but clarity, like the sound of a stream in a dry land. It did not accuse, it revealed, it named without shaming. And in that moment, I understood something I had never known before. The word was not only meant to be spoken, it was meant to be embodied. He was not quoting prophecy, he was fulfilling it. A woman approached him hesitant, eyes darting. Her clothes were plain, her face lined by sorrow. She asked no question, she simply stood, and he turned to her, not as a teacher to a student, but as a brother to a sister. "Your faith has made you well," he said. Her knees buckled, not from weakness, but from release. She did not weep, she glowed. More came, the sick, the shamed, the uncertain. He met each one not with instruction, but invitation. He touched the untouchable. He lifted the cast down, and the temple, long closed in upon itself, opened in his presence. Even the pillars seemed less rigid, even the shadows more generous. But not everyone rejoiced. The leaders watched, uneasy. Their authority, long unchallenged, now trembled, not because he defied them openly, but because he revealed a power deeper than theirs, a power that did not rely on fear or form, but on truth. They asked him questions meant to trap. Should we pay taxes? Who sinned, this man or his parents? What is the greatest commandment? But he did not fall. He answered not with cleverness, but with wisdom, not with defense, but with depth. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Neither this man nor his parents sinned it, is so the works of God might be revealed. Love the Lord your God, and love your neighbor as yourself. The words were not new, but in his mouth they breathed. I watched the hearts around me. Some cracked open like mine, others hardened. A priest clenched his jaw so tightly I thought his teeth would break. Another stepped back as if burned. They could not control him. They could not categorize him. He was too quiet for rebellion, too bold for submission, and most dangerous of all, too true to ignore. That evening, he sat on the steps and told a story. Not a sermon, a parable, about a vineyard, about tenants, about a beloved son sent by the owner. They seized him and killed him, he said, and threw him out of the vineyard. The listeners grew restless. They knew, they saw, but he did not accuse. He simply looked at them, eyes full of sorrow, and asked, "What then will the owner do?" The sun dipped low, shadows lengthened, and still he remained. Still he watched. Still he waited. I felt in his stillness not passivity, but patience, not resignation, but readiness. The light in his voice had not dimmed, it had deepened, as if he knew what would come, as if he embraced it. That night, the temple was quieter than I had ever known. Even the wind stepped gently, and I, still cracked, still dusty, felt more whole than I had in centuries, because I had heard the word not in thunder, not in stone tablets, but in a man who spoke like light, a man who did not just teach, but reveal, a man who did not come to conquer the temple, but to fulfill it. And I, an old stone, waited still, not for more signs, but for the moment when his voice would speak one final word, and that word, whatever it was, would make even the dust sing. It did not begin with thunder, it began with breath, shallow, labored, fading. I was not there. On the hill they call Golgotha, I did not feel the nails, I did not hear the hammer, but I felt the moment he died. Not as a sound, not as a cry, as a shudder deep within the earth, a moan through the marrow of creation, a silence that tore louder than any trumpet. And then the temple trembled, not with the fury of armies, not with the rage of men, but with the grief of God. The veil thick and ancient, the barrier between the holy and the human tore from top to bottom, not from earth to heaven, but from heaven to earth, a gesture not of man reaching up, but of God reaching down. And as it tore, I cracked. The fracture that had begun as a hairline thread now split wide. I felt it move through me like fire through dry wood. It did not break me, it opened me. I had feared this moment. I had long believed my strength was in my solidity, in my ability to endure, to remain unmoved. But now, as the world shifted and the sky darkened, I understood. The strength was not in holding firm, the strength was in making space. For the light did not pour in like a flood. It slipped through, gentle and slow, touching places long buried. It found the hollow chambers inside me where prayers had died unanswered, where sorrow had settled into stone. It found the memory of the girl who whispered, "If you are coming, I will wait." It found the tears of the woman, the laugh of the child, the blood of the lambs, the questions of centuries. And it did not rebuke, it healed. It did not command, it called, not with noise, with nearness. The temple shook, but it did not fall. The gold shivered on the walls. The bronze trembled. The priests ran. Some cried out. Others fell silent. But two remained, not whole, not untouched, but awake. At last, for so long, We thought the holy must be kept behind veils, guarded by ritual, protected by stone. But in one breath, he shattered the illusion, not to destroy the sacred, but to release it, to make it dwell not in walls, but in hearts, to write it not on tablets, but on skin. And I, an old stone once proud of my placement, now humbled by my breaking, saw it clearly. This was never about the temple, it was about the presence. In the days that followed, people came in hush, some mourning, some confused, some hopeful. They whispered his Namanot in anger now, but in wonder. They remembered the light in his voice. They remembered how the earth moved when he breathed his last. And I listened, cracked wide, holding their words like oil. There was one boy, no older than the one who had once said he didn't want to die alone. This boy came with a bundle of bread and sat near me, silent for a long time. Then he said, "I think he's not gone. Not really." And in that moment, I did not feel old. I felt new, because now, the crack that once marked my brokenness had become something else. A passage, a promise, a wound through which glory could enter. And I knew I was not alone. The temple would one day fall. The city would one day burn. But the light that passed through me would remain, in flesh, in spirit, in the small, flickering faith of those who still believed that love was stronger than death. So I remain, still cracked, still waiting, but not in sorrow, in light, because once a man walked these courts with truth in his touch and light in his voice. And when he died, he did not break the world, he opened it. And now, even the stones remember, especially the broken ones.